Organizations depend on a constant flow of information. People and systems must retrieve, edit, and share sensitive data to function, but leaving the gates wide open guarantees compromise. This interaction represents the core of any access decision. We have a subject, like this non-human API client, requesting an object, which is the payroll database, to perform a specific action, a bulk export. A secure system evaluates those three elements against the surrounding context. It checks if the request is originating from a recognized network, if it's happening during normal operating hours, and if the device meets security standards. If the system evaluates the request and cannot find an explicit rule permitting this exact combination of factors, the request hits a hard barrier. It is immediately rejected. This is the principle of implicit deny. You never want a system to allow an action simply because a rule prohibiting it happens to be missing or unclear. The default state of any secure environment is closed. Access must be intentionally granted, never accidentally inherited. Access control is a dynamic risk management mechanism. It takes static data classifications and turns them into active, enforceable rules, ensuring the right identity gets the right access under the right conditions. To process any access request safely, a system relies on a sequence of 4 deeply connected functions: identification, authentication, authorization, and accountability. Identification is the act of a subject claiming an identity. It answers the question, who or what is requesting access? Entering a username or an employee ID is an identification claim. Authentication verifies that specific claim. It demands proof, usually through something you know, like a password, something you have, like a security token, or something you are, like a biometric scan. This chart shows the distinction between verification and permission. Successful authentication only proves who you are. It does not establish a legitimate business need. Authorization is the separate, distinct decision of what that verified identity is actually permitted to do. Logging in does not grant you the right to execute a restricted administrative function. Finally, we have accountability. The system tags the specific user identity to the rejected request in an audit log, connecting the action directly to the responsible actor. This need for clear traceability is why shared accounts are dangerous. If a team of 5 uses one administrative logging, the audit trail collapses. When a critical record is deleted, the system cannot prove which specific person executed the command, crippling any incident investigation. Non-human identities like automated backups, cloud workloads, and reporting scripts require this exact same 4-step rigor. They operate continuously and at scale, making strict controls vital. Confusing these 4 functions causes security architecture to fail. Assuming that strong authentication inherently grants safe authorization is a critical error. Proving your identity is only step 1. To manage permissions for thousands of users and services, organizations rely on structural frameworks known as access control models. Discretionary access control, DAC, allows the creator of a file to decide who can access it. It is highly flexible for collaboration, but prone to oversharing. Mandatory access control, or MAC, operates on the opposite end of the spectrum, using strict, centrally enforced security clearances where users cannot override the rules. Role-based access control, RBAC, strikes a balance by assigning baseline permissions to job functions rather than individual users. When a university hires 50 new advisors, the system doesn't require 50 individual configuration requests. Each new account simply inherits the predefined advisor role, allowing the organization to standardize permissions across thousands of users simultaneously. But if roles are defined too broadly, or if users accumulate multiple roles over time, a single poorly designed role can grant hundreds of employees excessive access they don't actually need. This model compares the static nature of roles against attribute-based access control, or ABAC. ABAC solves the rigidity of roles by injecting dynamic context. Instead of relying solely on a fixed job title, the system evaluates real-time variables like the user's current location, the time of day, and the security status of their device. For instance, a user might be fully authorized to view a single record from their office. But if that same user attempts a bulk export of thousands of records from a foreign IP address, the attribute-based policies evaluate the volume and location, triggering a denial. Structural models provide the architecture for permissions, but architecture alone is dangerous. It must be constrained by strict security principles. We can visualize these constraints as the access envelope, a multidimensional boundary defining exactly what an authenticated subject is authorized to do. It segments into 4 distinct quadrants: resource scope, action scope, purpose scope, and time scope. The principle of need to know tightly constrains the purpose and resource scopes. An academic advisor has a legitimate purpose to view student data, but they only need to see records for their specific assigned students. The envelope shrinks, locking out the rest of the dataset. Meanwhile, the principle of least privilege constrains the action scope. If an automated backup service needs to archive data, it receives read and copy rights. The ability to interactively edit or delete files is explicitly crossed out. These principles address different variables. Need to know asks exactly what information is required for the task. Least privilege asks what minimum permission is required to execute it. Finally, the time scope enforces a hard expiration. Temporary assignments or third-party consultant reviews cannot remain active forever. Once the approved duration depletes, the entire access envelope collapses to 0. Broadening any single boundary of this envelope, whether extending the time limit or adding a high-risk action like bulk deletion, widens the window for misuse. Without a documented purpose for that expansion, the organization's residual risk remains unmanaged. Access control architectures fail over time because organizational roles change faster than system permissions are reviewed and revoked. To manage this friction, organizations must separate the identity lifecycle from the access lifecycle. The identity lifecycle governs the existence and status of an account itself. The access lifecycle governs the specific permissions attached to that account. These lifecycles are tracked through the joiner, mover, and leaver model. When someone joins, an identity is created and initial access is granted. When they leave, the identity is disabled and all access is revoked. This timeline illustrates the mover phase, when an employee changes roles. The core identity line remains continuous, but access must be rebuilt. If unpruned, permissions accumulate into privilege creep. The user holds conflicting permissions that no longer map to any legitimate role. When access lifecycles are ignored entirely, organizations end up with stale or orphaned accounts. Former contractors, dormant student workers, or retired service applications effectively leave unmonitored backdoors directly into the network. Decoupling these lifecycles makes one thing clear. Simply having a valid, active user account does not inherently justify retaining access to a specific resource indefinitely. Highly impactful roles, like system administrators, possess capabilities that bypass standard envelopes entirely. They can alter core security settings, create user accounts, and view deep system logs. Because these capabilities are so powerful, they require extreme safeguards. Separation of duties ensures that no single identity can execute every step of a critical process alone. The primary defense against continuous administrative risk is temporary elevation, often called just-in-time privilege. The user operates with standard permissions for their daily work, actively requesting elevated administrative rights only for the brief window they actually need them. In severe emergencies, responders use break glass access. Accountability here isn't maintained by blocking the critical action. Instead, it relies on strict monitoring, requiring an exhaustive credential checkout log, immediate security alerts, and a mandatory post-use review. A modern access request requires evaluation across multiple vectors. Every approval must survive a cascading logic tree, evaluating the resource, the classification, the authentication strength, the precise actions requested, the purpose, and the time limits, before the system executes a command. Yet residual risk always remains. Authorized users make mistakes, credentials get stolen, and multi-factor authentication can be fraudulently bypassed. Access control reduces the likelihood of unauthorized activity, but it cannot operate in a vacuum. Robust access control relies on continuous reviews, layered defense in depth, and an unyielding adherence to implicit deny. That is how static data classifications become living, operational security.